Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 6, The Meaning of True Initiation, from Ancient Mysteries and Modern Masonry by Charles H. Vail. Lecture 6, The Meaning of True Initiation. It is a well-known fact that the biographies of all the great world saviors closely resemble each other. All are represented as divinely begotten and born at the same time of the year. All are threatened with death in infancy, all are tempted, persecuted, and finally slain. All descend into hell, and after 3 days rise from the dead, and at last all ascend into heaven and become glorified gods. What is the explanation of this wonderful similarity in the lives of Jesus, Apollonius, Mithra, Buddha, Krishna, Zoroaster, etc.? The solution of this remarkable identity is to be found in the fact that all these saviors were initiates into the mysteries of antiquity. The various narratives do not describe the physical life of the heroes, but the inner mystic life, being but a materialization of the mystic life of the initiate. The physical plane biographies might greatly vary, but their lives as initiates are ever the same. In our study of the meaning of true initiation, we shall see the origin of these stories. I will commence at the beginning and trace the various stages of progress. In the first place, a man to be recognized as a candidate must be pure and holy and possess a well-developed and well-trained mind. Having attained the exoteric good life, he enters on the preparation for initiation. Certain conditions have now to be fulfilled and certain attributes acquired. The aspirant for initiation must be worthy and well-qualified, duly and truly prepared. During this period, the candidate is said to be treading the probationary path, the path which leads up to the straight gate, beyond which is the narrow way, or the path of holiness, the way of the cross, which leadeth unto life. Let me briefly sum up the attributes to be acquired. 1. Discrimination. This means that the aspirant becomes able to distinguish between the eternal and the temporal, the real and the unreal, so that what is unreal to the world becomes real to him. He must set his affections on things above, loosen the ties on worldly objects, and fix his aspirations on things pertaining to the unseen. This has been called allegiance to the higher self. 2. Devotion to right. The aspirant here learns to do what is right because it is right, without regard to his own gain or loss. This is sometimes called indifference to personal reward as the fruit of good actions. This indifference is the natural result of the previous step. Men cease to crave for earthly rewards when they realize their impermanent character. 3. The 6 qualifications. A. Control of thoughts. Purity and calmness, which result from control of the mind. B. Control of actions. Mastery of one's actions and words. C. Tolerance, freedom from bigotry, from an exaggerated attachment to any doctrinal belief leading to a wide impartiality. D. Forbearance, freedom from resentment in respect to real or fancied wrongs. E. Steadfastness, incapability of being turned aside from one's purpose. F. Faith, confidence in the power of the master to teach the truth and of oneself to grasp and wield it. 4. Direct order or succession, a clearly defined desire for spiritual existence and union with the higher ideals. 5. Readiness for initiation, the result of the previous acquirements. The candidate is not expected to fully develop these attributes. He must, however, have made progress in them before he is ready for the first step on the path proper. When the time comes that he is regarded fit for initiation, he is conducted by the master, who has been watching over his earlier progress, to the threshold where the guardians of the mysteries open for him the straight gate. The path proper is divided into 4 stages, or 5 stages with the culmination. In the first 4 stages, the period between the good man and the triumphant master, the neophyte is to cast off the 10 fetters that bind him to the circle of rebirth and which keep him from realizing nirvana, the highest state of spiritual consciousness. No partial success will here suffice. He must be entirely free before he can pass from one stage to the next. When these fetters are cast off, the ego is ready for the 5th stage, full adeptship. He becomes an aseka adept, a Christ triumphant. The first step in the Hindu system is called Sotapatti or Sohan. One who attains this level is called the Sotapanna or Sowani. He who has entered the stream, one who has begun the higher human evolution. This evolution is that of the divine child and is called in different systems by different names: Christ, Horus, Buddha, etc. It was at this first great initiation that the divine child was born in man. This was spoken of as the new or second birth, a mystic term often employed to denote the rites of initiation. In India, even today, the higher castes are called the twice-born, and the ceremony that makes them such is called initiation. The rite of baptism is connected with the first initiation. It is a symbol of purification and signifies that the candidate has attained the purity of character necessary for acceptance. In all these mysteries, says Dr. Mackey, the first step taken by the candidate was a lustration or purification. The aspirant was not permitted to enter the sacred vestibule or take any part in the secret formula of initiation until, by water or by fire, he was emblematically purified from the corruptions of the world which he was about to leave behind. Symbolism of Freemasonry, Mackey, page 93. The purification of the body was symbolic of a purification of the heart. Frederick Portal, in speaking of the Egyptian mysteries, says, in Egyptian cosmogony, water was the mother of the world, the matrix of all created beings. Man was considered as an image of the world. The initiate was to be born again to a new life, and the baptism thenceforward symbolized the primeval waters. It was on this account that the initiate was called Moses, a word signifying in Egyptian, according to Josephus, saved from the water or by the water. Water was a symbol of purity and designated the birth of the pure or initiated. A comparison of Egyptian symbols with those of the Hebrews, page 81. Again, he says, speaking of the method of Egyptian baptism, Horus and Thoth-Lunas pour water on the head of the candidate, who is transformed to divine life and to purity. The legend accompanying this scene he translates thus: Horus, son of Isis, baptizes with water and fire. This is repeated 3 times. The name given to the baptized or anointed, as we have seen, was Moses, signifying regenerated or begotten again. Remember, the lawgiver of the Jews was called by the Egyptians Moses, one saved by water, or in other words, one initiated. In the Acts of the Apostles, we are told that Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. If so, he must have been an initiate. The great mystery of Egypt was this second birth, the birth of Horus. Says W. Marsham Adams, throughout the sacred writings of Egypt, there is no doctrine of which more frequent mention is made than that of a divine birth. The Egyptian Doctrine of Light, Adams, page 89. The candidate was initiated from the sacred roll, called the Book of the Greatest Mysteries, and after passing the passage of the sun, the crown of illumination was placed upon his head. And now the new twice-born, clothed in power and crowned with light, traverses the abodes or scenes of his former weakness, there to discern, by his own enlightened perception, how it is Osiris who satisfies the balance of him who rules the heavens, to exert in its supernal freedom his creative will, now the Lord, not the slave of the senses, and to rejoice in the just suffering which wrought his illumination and mastery, page 185. Hermes, in the Secret Sermon on the Mountain, discourses on the secret of the new birth. This might well be called the initiation of Tat. The sermon is in the form of a dialogue between Hermes the master and Tat the pupil. Tat says, in the general sermons, Father, a technical name of the master or initiator, thou didst speak in riddles most unclear, conversing on divinity, and when thou saidst no man could e'er be saved before rebirth, thy meaning thou didst hide. Further, when I became thy suppliant in wending up the mount, after thou hadst conversed with me, and when I longed to learn the sermon, Logos, on rebirth, for this beyond all other things is just the thing I know not, thou saidst that thou wouldst give it me, when thou shalt have become a stranger to the world. Wherefore I got me ready and made the thought in me a stranger to the world illusion. G.R.S. Mead, in his Thrice Greatest Hermes, in commenting upon this discourse, says, the time has come for Tat to receive through his master the touch of the true mind in consciousness. The Christ is to be born in his heart. The light of the pleroma is to shine in his inmost being. It is to be a new birth, a regeneration or rebirth, in the sense of being born from above. Thrice Greatest Hermes Mead, Volume 2, page 239. Tat had made himself ready for this rebirth by passing through 3 stages of probation. He had been prepared by wending up the mount. The phrase "on the mountain" or "wending up the mountain" is symbolical of the grades of initiation. The term is of frequent occurrence in the Christian Gnostic and apocryphal writings, and everywhere signifies the Mount of Initiation. In the popular beliefs, the mountain is called the Mount of Galilee, on which all the rites of initiation were performed. But the real mount was no physical elevation, it was the height of contemplation, an inner state of spiritual consciousness. Tat had been wending his way up this mount and was now ready for the new birth, the crowning mystery of the spiritual way for all the mystic schools of the time. The secret that Tat would learn is the mystery of the birth from the virgin womb, the birth of man, the great mystery of regeneration. Page 240. Tat entreats Hermes to explain to him the manner of this rebirth, but Hermes cannot tell to Tat the secret in words. It must be self-perceived. This race, my child, says Hermes, was never taught. This is the race referred to by Philo as the race of devotees who are ever taught more and more to see. Let them strive for the initiation of that which is. Let them transcend the sun which men perceive and gaze upon the light beyond the true sun or logos, nor ever leave this rank which leads to perfect blessedness. Now they who betake themselves to the divine service do so, not because of any custom or on someone's advice or appeal, but carried away with heavenly love, like those initiated into the Bacchic and the Corybantic mysteries. They are afire with God until they behold the object of their love. Again, Philo says, now this natural class of men lit. Race is to be found in many parts of the inhabited world, for both the Grecian and non-Grecian world must needs share in the perfect good. Philo on the contemplative life. This race, then, was the race of initiates, the race of Elxai, mentioned by Epiphanius. Those attaining this state apprehended the mystery of rebirth. Although this spiritual state could not be taught to the neophyte in words, still, as Mead puts it, Hermes can guide Tat toward the realization of the blessed sight by putting himself into the sublime state of consciousness that Tat, so to speak, bathes or is baptized in his master's spiritual presence, the cup of the mind. This is the true laying on of hands. Hermes describes the change that takes place in himself when he passes into the high spiritual consciousness. Whene'er I see within myself the simple vision that I've passed through myself into a body that can never die, and now I am not what I was before, but I am born in mind. The master focuses his consciousness in the higher part of his spiritual nature, transfers it to a spiritual vehicle. The way to do this is not taught, and it cannot be seen by the compound element by means of which thou seest. That is, it cannot be understood from any sensible experience. No physical sight can penetrate this mystery. Thou seest me with eyes, my son, says Hermes, but what I am thou dost not understand. The outer physical form of the master was there, but his soul had been liberated from the body. This mystery could only be understood by one who himself had reached the higher state. Tat's spiritual senses are being born by the aid of the master. He says, into fierce frenzy and mind fury hast thou plunged me, Father, for now no longer do I see myself. He is losing touch with the physical plane consciousness, but that is not enough. Hermes says, I would, my son, that thou hadst been passed right through thyself, that is, passed into the higher vehicle, the body that can never die. This is the mystery that Hermes could not explain in words, the secret sermon on the mountain. Isis is not permitted to declare the secret of rebirth openly to Horus. She says, I may not tell the story of this birth, for it is not permitted to declare the origin of thy descent, O Horus, son of mighty power, lest afterward the way of birth of the immortal gods should be known unto men. Quoted in Thrice Greatest Hermes, Volume 2, page 242. In the Isis mystery tradition, we find that it was a part of the work to bestow this higher consciousness. Diodorus informs us that it was Isis who discovered the filter of immortality, by means of which, when her son Horus, who had been plotted against by the Titans and found dead beneath the waters, not only raised him to life, but also made him a sharer in immortality. Initiation bestowed or restored to the soul the consciousness of immortality. This was truly a new birth, an inner change, a striking of a new keynote. He who is reborn into the gnosis passes from man into the state of Superman, The very essence of gnosis is the fact that man can transcend his present limitations and become consciously divine. This is true illumination. Those who attained this Hermes or Horus state were to keep silent concerning their powers and not boast of their gnosis. We find this same teaching in the Christian mysteries. Jesus says, "Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." John 3:3. Peter says, "Seeing ye have purified your souls in obeying the truth, being born again, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible, by the word of God, which liveth and abideth forever." 1 Peter 1:22-23. The birth is spoken of as that of water and the Spirit. In the mysteries of Jesus, as in all others, baptism was always connected with the first initiatory rite. Many illustrations of this pivot doctrine of the early church might be cited from Gnostic writings. The overwriter of the Nicene document tells us that the lesser mysteries pertain to fleshly generation, whereas the greater deal with the new or second birth, with regeneration and not with Genesis. In speaking of the mystery of regeneration, the writer says, "For this is the gate of heaven, and this is the house of God, where the good God dwells alone, into which house no impure man shall come, no psychic, no fleshly man, but it is kept under watch for the spiritual alone, where, when they come, they must cast away their garments, and all become bridegrooms, obtaining their true manhood through the virginal spirit. For this is the virgin, big with child, conceiving and bearing a son, not psychic, not fleshly, but a blessed eon of eons, that is, an immortal God. This is the birth of the Christ, or Horus in man, the great mystery that awaits us when we have made ourselves strangers to the world illusion, as Hermes puts it, or as Jesus says in one of his newfound sayings, "Except ye fast to the world, ye shall in no wise find the kingdom of God." This writing is important as it shows that the inner teaching of Christianity was identical with the tenets of the other mysteries, Eleusinian, Egyptian, Mithraic, Dionysian, etc. The date of this Christian overwriter was about the middle of the 2nd century. In the mystery ritual of initiation in the Acts of John, we read, "Who I am, thou shalt know when I depart, that is," by contrast. "What I am seen to be, that am I not, but what I am thou shalt see when thou comest." In other words, this spiritual state must be realized to be known, and only those who had attained the Christ state, the perfect initiate, could know it. Remember the words of Hermes already cited, "Thou seest me with eyes, my son, but what I am thou dost not understand." This consciousness transcends man's normal state. Although the new birth primarily signified the first great initiation, when the white-robed neophyte entered the communion of saints, still the mystic term might well indicate the other stages of soul development, for it signalized the entrance to a new life. The initiate is ushered into a new state of consciousness at each stage, as much so as the newborn infant when ushered into physical existence. It is difficult for us to imagine these higher states of consciousness, but each state ushered the candidate into a new realm where, while retaining hold on the physical plane, he had to adapt himself to new conditions. Each rite was a sign and symbol of spiritual consciousness which had come to the newborn disciple. The Christ principle, the intuitional wisdom, is born in the soul. And when that Buddhic spiritual consciousness is awakened, the soul becomes again, as it were, a little child, born into that higher life of the initiated, which is in truth the kingdom of heaven. Christian Creed, Leadbeater, page 76. The newborn son, the little child, a technical term denoting one just initiated, is now to live the divine life and become like unto the Father, pass from sonship to perfection. The new or spiritual birth, then, is a mystic fact. The materialization of this inner truth into the dogma of the virgin birth must have been a comparatively late development in the evolution of popular or general Christianity. The dogma is not to be found in the common document, and the earlier traditions all state that Joseph was the natural father of Jesus. Celsus accused the Christians of changing their gospel story many times in order to better answer the objections of opponents. This is true only of the exoteric tradition. Now let us consider the various stages in the evolution of the Christ in man. To understand this higher evolution, which constituted the work of the true mysteries, we must understand man's constitution. We will use here the Christian terminology because of familiarity with the terms, but the facts described are the same in all systems. Christian theology usually accepts the threefold division: spirit, soul, and body. This is sound, but in order to understand the mystery of the life of the divine child, especially his crucifixion, resurrection and ascension, we shall need a further subdivision of man's constitution. The spirit is itself a trinity, containing the three aspects of the divine life: intelligence, love, and will. The soul is twofold, composed of the mind and emotional nature. The body is the material instrument of the soul and spirit, and is also dual, being composed of the dense physical body and its etheric double. These lower portions or principles, the dual physical body, the desire or emotional body, and the mental body, form the natural body spoken of by St. Paul. The apostle says, there is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. The spiritual is made up of the three higher principles. The lowest of these is sometimes called the causal body, the second division, the bliss or glorified or resurrected body, the third and highest division, the atmic body. These principles or bodies are correlated with the lower five of the seven planes of our universe. The normal evolution of mankind takes place on the three lowest planes. The supernormal evolution, that of the initiate, proceeds on the next two planes, which are the spiritual. These five planes constitute the field of the evolution of consciousness until the human merges into the divine. Bearing these divisions of man's constitution in mind and the planes to which they are correlated, we are ready to study the mystery of the Christ evolution. This evolution is set forth in the story of the mystic Christ. The mystic Christ is one aspect of the Christ of the mysteries. The mystic Christ deals with this Christ evolution, which is the development of the love or second aspect of the unfolding divine spirit in man, called the Christ. The other aspect, called the mythic Christ, is the Logos, the second aspect or person of the Trinity, descending into matter. The development of the first division of the spiritual body, the aspect of intelligence, takes place in the ordinary life of the world. When this intellectual development has been carried to a high point, accompanied by moral development, then the man is ready for the evolution of the second aspect of the spirit, the second division of the spiritual body, that of love, called the Christ. We will consider first this aspect of the mystic Christ, the evolution of the Christ of the human spirit. This is the Christ who is in every one of us, who is born and lives, is crucified, rises from the dead, and ascends into heaven in every suffering and triumphant Son of Man. This is the story of the mystic life of every initiate. We have seen that at the first great initiation, the Christ is born in the disciple. This is the second birth to which we have referred. He is born into the kingdom of heaven as a little child, the name given to a new initiate. Jesus said that except a man becomes as a little child, he cannot enter the kingdom. Every such child is beset by perils that do not befall others. The dark powers seek his undoing, but the Christ child once born cannot be destroyed. He grows in wisdom and spiritual stature until the time comes for the second great initiation, symbolized by the baptism by water and the Spirit, which confers on him the powers necessary for the teacher. He then goes forth into the world to labor and is led by the Spirit into the wilderness, and is there exposed to severe temptations. The evil powers strive to lure him from his set purpose, bidding him use his unfolding powers to secure worldly ends. But triumphant over those temptations, he uses the powers which he would not employ for his own needs to save the world. This devotion to service leads him to the third great initiation, symbolized by the Transfiguration. He again ascends the mountain apart, the sacred mount of initiation, but he cannot there remain. He sets his face resolutely toward Jerusalem, where he is to meet the baptism of the Holy Ghost and of fire, the final test and the last stage of the way of the cross. He is now ready for the fourth great initiation, symbolized by the Passion. He has become victorious over the lower nature and is willing to nail it to the cross. Although he enters into Jerusalem in triumph and in full confidence that he is prepared for the sacrifice, there comes the bitter agony in the garden, and for a moment he prays that the cup may pass. That bitter cup of betrayal, desertion, and pain, when in the horrors and darkness of this final trial it seems that even the Father has forsaken him. His inner vision is blinded and he thinks himself alone, but he is still steadfast. And with an unconquering trust, he yields up the lower life and descends into hell, that no region in the universe may remain untrodden. But liberated from the material body, he sees the light once more and feels himself again as the Son, and is ready for the fifth initiation, symbolized by the resurrection and ascension, and rises triumphant over death and hell. Then he remains for a time on earth to teach his disciples, and at last ascends into heaven. This story of the gospel biography sets forth in allegory the life history of every initiate. The initiatory rites symbolize the states through which the candidate passes. The stage of the soul's progress, typified by death, burial, and resurrection, was called in Egypt the death rite, and by the Gnostic Christians, the initiation of the cross. The candidate was received by the initiating hierophant at the proper time and place, usually a secluded chamber in a temple or pyramid, and laid on the stone floor with arms outstretched, sometimes on a wooden cross, which was hollowed out to support the human figure. He was then touched with the thyrsus, the spear of the crucifixion, on the heart. He then passed into a deep trance. The body was placed in a sarcophagus of stone, a vault or tomb beneath the floor of the hall of initiation, and carefully guarded. Meantime, while the body was dead and buried, he himself was fully alive in the invisible world, Hades, and undergoing what was called the tests of earth, water, fire, and air. He then put on his perfected bliss body, which was now fully organized as a vehicle of consciousness. After the third day, the cross bearing the body was lifted up and carried out into the air on the east side of the pyramid or temple, and placed on a sloping surface ready to greet the rising sun. At the moment the first rays touched the face, the perfected initiate, the Horus or Christ, rose from the dead, resuscitated the body, and glorified it by his resurrected body, no longer a natural man, but a spiritual man, having overcome death and hell. The trance typifies his death unto sin, the revival, his rebirth or resurrection unto righteousness. In the Acts of John, there is preserved the tradition of the inner schools on the mystery of the initiation of the cross. We find here no trace of the literal historic tradition. The crucifixion was an inner experience of the soul. The cross was a symbol of the crucifixion of the soul in the matter and its regeneration. Mystical death, says Dr. Hartman, is identical with spiritual regeneration. Magic White and Black, Hartman, page 185. The cross also symbolizes cosmic processes. If the Acts of John had given the drama of initiation as well as the liturgy, we should undoubtedly have seen that the passion of Christ was something quite different from what has been popularly supposed. I have shown in the preceding lectures that the symbolic rites of crucifixion and the resurrection of the dead were connected with the most worldwide mystic festivals of antiquity, a highly important fact, for it enables us to understand the meaning of the Christian crucifixion and resurrection. When the neophyte reached a certain stage of perfection or enlightenment, he was said to rise from the dead. The phrase, resurrection from the dead, is a mystical phrase used to represent the new birth or resurrection, the Gnostic illumination. When the candidate reached this stage, he was immortal, had attained unbroken consciousness of his spiritual ego. He became now the triumphant Christ. I am he that liveth and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, amen, and have the keys of hell and death. Revelation 1:18. Let me here cite several authorities regarding this important ceremony. Dr. Oliver, speaking of initiation, says it was considered to be a mystical death or oblivion of all the stains and imperfections of a corrupted and evil life, as well as a descent into hell, where every pollution was purged by lustrations of fire and water. And the perfect epopt was then said to be regenerated or newborn, restored to a renovated existence of life, light and purity, and placed under divine protection. History of Initiation, Oliver, page 2. In his Signs and Symbols, he again says, in all the ancient mysteries, before an aspirant could claim to participate in the higher secrets of the institution, he was placed within the pastos, or bed or coffin, or in other words, was subjected to a solitary confinement for a prescribed period of time that he might reflect seriously, in seclusion and darkness, on what he was about to undertake. This was the symbolical death of the mysteries, and his deliverance from confinement was the act of regeneration, or being born again, or, as it was also termed, being raised from the dead. The ceremony here alluded to was doubtless the same as the descent into Hades. His resurrection from the bed or tomb was his restoration to life, or his regeneration into a new world, and it was virtually the same as his return from Hades. The candidate was made to undergo these changes in scenic representation and was placed under the pastos in perfect darkness, generally for the space of 3 days and nights. Signs and symbols, Oliver, page 78. Dr. Mackey says, the vault was, in the ancient mysteries, symbolic of the grave, for initiation was symbolic of death, where alone divine truth is to be found. Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, Mackey, page 852. He again says, the intention of the ceremonies of initiation into them was by a scenic representation of death and subsequent restoration to life to impress the great truths of the resurrection of the dead and the immortality of the soul. They were all funereal in their character. They began in sorrow and lamentation. They ended in joy. There was an aphonism or burial, a pastos or grave, an euresis or discovery of what had been lost, and a legend or mythical relation, all of which were entirely and profoundly symbolical in their character. The Symbolism of Freemasonry, Mackey, page 38. Faber says, the initiation into the mysteries scenically represented the mystic descent into Hades and the return from thence to the light of day. Origin of Pagan Idolatry, Faber, volume 4, page 384. Many other authorities might be cited in evidence of this ceremony, but this will suffice to prove the ceremony universal and connected with all the mystery institutions. The saying of Jesus that the Son of Man shall remain 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth corresponds with the ancient rite, but in the gospel story of the resurrection, the interval from Friday evening to Sunday morning cannot be regarded as 3 days and 3 nights. It has been suggested that the shortening of the time was due to the fact that in the degeneracy of the mysteries, where attempts were made to minimize all requirements, the original period became so tedious to candidates who could not pass into the trance that the time was reduced from 72 hours to 27 by just reversing the figures, thus saving the candidate nearly 2 full days of solitary confinement. The materialized gospel story evidently followed this later practice. These great rites stood originally for great spiritual truths. The body with which the candidate rose from the dead was the bliss body, the body of the Christ, which had been developed during the period of service on earth. This body belongs to the life of the initiate, the Christ life. Its building begins at the second birth, when the Christ is born in man and reaches its completion at the resurrection. During this evolutionary period, when the Son is being made perfect, the initiate is called the Son of Man. The perfected, risen, and glorified Christ is called the Son of God. There is still another feature of the Christ story, the ascension. This has to do with the third part of the spiritual body, the putting on of the atmic body, or the vesture or robe of glory, as it is called in the Pistis Sophia. Spiritual evolution consists in the organization and vitalization of the various garments or sheaths of man into vestures or robes of power and glory, for the use of the regenerate in the path of ascent, the way above. The highest vesture prepares the Son for union with the Father. And as a spiritual fact, this is symbolized by the ascension. And a legend, the material story of the ascension, is an historicization of this inner mystic truth, experienced by every soul that becomes consciously one with God. The ascension for humanity is when the whole race has attained the Christ condition, the state of the Son, and that Son becomes one with the Father, and God is all in all. That is the goal, prefigured in the triumph of the initiate, but reached only when the human race is perfected, and when the great orphan, humanity, is no longer an orphan, but consciously recognizes itself as the Son of God. Esoteric Christianity, Besant, page 249. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.